Welcome to our webinar this afternoon, Leveraging Guest Personas Across Channels. My name is Janet Hall, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Fishbowl. I'm delighted that you could join Erin Hunter, our Director of Analytics Solutions, for today's session. Erin is going to discuss personas, what they are, and the role they play in growing your business. She'll then turn to a case study she has worked on to present a persona analysis, how she worked with the client to develop the personas, and she'll show you the details of how the persona can be leveraged across various channels. Before we get started, I want to share some exciting Fishbowl news in case you haven't already heard. We've just acquired Clip Technologies, a retail marketing automation firm. It's Silicon-based Valley firm, and we're very excited to have them with us. If you haven't read our press release yet, I urge you to go to fishbowl.com later on and take a look. We'll be adding more to the story in the coming weeks. Now back to the webinar. You can see Erin's bio on the screen. She's responsible for delivering analytics solutions to Fishbowl clients, and she is particularly an expert in developing personas and helping clients identify their target guests and then develop strategies for increasing their spend. Just a quick word about the format. Feel free to submit questions anytime. Erin will answer them as she can. If she can't get to them while she's presenting, then she'll address them at the end of the remarks. Thank you so much for joining us. And now I'll turn this over to Erin.
Thanks, Janet. Good afternoon and happy December. By this point in the year, you're either feverishly working on your budgets or you've already submitted them. Either way, today's discussion can help you think through which channels support your targeted segmentation goals and help you better allocate your channel dollars. We'll start by level setting on what a persona is, why it's so important to grow your traffic and acquire new guests, and finally we'll discuss how the insights we see can be leveraged across various channels to effectively reach your target. So what is a persona? We often throw around words like segments and clusters, but what exactly is a persona and how is it different? A persona is developed by taking all of your existing data points and assigning like attributes of your guests to create a realistic person. It allows us as marketers to paint a picture of a user based on things like what their preferences are, how do they use your brand, where do they live, whether or not they have children, what do they do online. The options are really tailored on the data that you have and what data you can source. We see clients with all kinds of varying data points. Typically, the data that we get falls under one of four categories. The first being information that your guests have opted in or have opted to share with you, or you've collected from your guest. So think in terms of enrollment across your channels, like email, apps, and social properties. Perhaps you've run a sweepstakes, or your guests are transacting with you through a loyalty program or online ordering. It's basically a known exchange of data between you and the guest. And with this comes some level of expectation from the guest. Like a loyalty reward, confirmation email if they're buying online, or special event updates through email, mobile, or the social channel. Another popular data source is third-party data appending. Data appending is a marketing practice that involves taking known guest data, like a first name and a last name, and matching against a third-party data warehouse. This is typically sourced through credit reporting agencies like TransUnion or Equifax. This allows us to obtain further data points like the guest's age and gender, the presence of children in the household. It also provides insights on behavior like what mediums they tend to consume most, how they tend to spend their time, what the household income is, and whether or not they're working or retired. Third-party data appends is a multidimensional view using your guest's individual and household information. One of the more widely available data sources is transactional and payment data, and they're really two distinct things here. Transactional data is also called TLD, or transactional log detail, and it's typically from your POS. It'll tell you the check details like what menu items were ordered, what the discount applied was, what day part or area of restaurant, It's the typical things you see when you look at a check. It's also known as market basket. Payment data, which is different, allows you to connect to the guest. It's also captured at the POS, though the level of collection varies by client and payment provider. This type of data provides the type of payment that was used, and if it's a credit card, what type of card, the last 4 digits of the card, and the name associated with that card. There are various ways to connect transactional and payment data. Some of these examples would be reservation data, mobile payment, or app usage, or even loyalty usage. And the last type of data source that we typically see is survey response data. Surveying both your member and non-member base can be a great layer of insight, particularly when you're missing any of the prior data sources that we've just talked about. By asking a panel what they like and dislike, where they dine and how often, and how much they spend, we can begin to understand specific drivers of consideration. So is a locale menu something that will really resonate with a group? Do they come to you because your location is convenient, or do they crave a specific dish that you offer? We can also begin to understand at a deeper level who your real competitor is and how that can vary by location. And while stated frequency can sometimes be overstated, we can weigh the responses to accurately gauge high, medium, and low users. Survey data can really provide a lot of valuable information, particularly when it's used for both member and non-members. So as you can see here, this is a list that you're probably familiar with, and you likely have access to some of this data already. So now let's explore how these input sources develop into a realistic person. At Fishbowl, we work with our clients to uncover all available data, and where necessary, we work with clients to source additional data to fill in the gaps in an effort to create the most defined outcome possible. For the first step here on the left, highlighted in red, if you think back to the previous slide, we combine all of your available data, so the attributes that you collect or you have access to, which is typically what we call your first-party data. This is your e-club, your app and loyalty users, your POS data. We then layer on any third-party data that has been sourced. This is typically the individual and household attributes like age and gender, whether or not they have kids and live in the suburbs, or if they're retired and live in the city, for example. You may already have some of this data, but if not, we can work with you to source what you don't have. We combine all of these attributes, as you see here in the middle of the screen, combine the attributes of the users and apply a proprietary modeling. This is where our skilled data science team creates algorithms and uses machine learning as a method of analyzing patterns. This is particularly useful when there's a very large number of variables. Then the modeling creates natural groupings among guests based on similarities with each other and differences with other groups. So we don't go into this with a hypothesis of who your guest is. This approach is really a non-biased output of who your guests truly are. This outcome then creates a group of like guests, which is what we're calling here personas, and they represent a statistically significant group of your total guest population. This helps you better attract and market to your core guests that are so valuable. We typically see that these personas differ in a few key ways. Mostly age and income, but where they are in their life cycle is key to understanding what attracts them to your brand. So now that we know what personas are and how they're created, let's look at why it's so important that you know your guest. I know it sounds obvious, everybody wants to know their guest, but the reasons can be endless. There really are some key reasons, though, that you need to be armed with this information in order to answer critical business questions. And likely your entire organization is centered around these same questions. So for example, where should I be spending my marketing dollars? How do we drive true incremental traffic? What do my best guests truly represent? And how do I create more of them? How should I be using promotional and discount dollars? These are all internal questions that your teams are probably facing, but there's some external reasons as well. The industry is constantly changing, and your competitors are likely going through similar processes to understand who the guest is. As new competition takes hold, emerging technology brings a whole new competition in and of itself. The share of wallet that you have access to will be shrinking if it hasn't already. Competitors like Blue Apron, HelloFresh, and PlateJoy are meal planning services leveraging highly targeted insights on users and are fighting for some of the same dollars that you are. Likewise, the emergence of delivery services like DoorDash and Uber are taking the guest experience out of your hands. Having a better understanding of what motivates your guests to visit and to spend more with you enables you to drive the relationship with the guest. And perhaps the most important reason, however, your guests have given you their information and they've given it to others as well. They expect you to not only treat it responsibly, but to also use it to tell them more about what they want to know. If they've given you their information, they are expecting a one-to-one interaction with you. Okay, so let's dive into this. We'll take a look at a fine dine client who wanted to know their target. In other words, they challenged us to say, who is the beachhead? What's the best way to effectively target more of them? And where should they be spending and investing in terms of channel and channel development? This client had a very tenured email database, and because this initiative was driven by the CEO, they were able to work with IT to provide both transactional and payment data, as well as do a third-party data append, which, remember, that's the demographic and behavioral information. They also did a survey panel to both members and non-members because they wanted to understand better who their competitive set is and how that changes across segments. You'll see in part that the targeted personas that were created and then associated strategies to reach those audience across multiple channels with more relevant messaging. I mentioned earlier that a lot of what we see around personas is really focused around life cycle, and certainly this case study supports that. Remember, this is a fine dine client, so there's going to be a bit of barrier to entry. So a lot of what we see in terms of household income will skew higher than the national average, but we also see shifts within the guest base. Here we have 4 distinct groups that use the brand for very different reasons. They spend and visit in different ways. With this client, there wasn't an obvious one and only target, but rather a primary and secondary. And the remaining personas carry value in different ways. You can see here they begin to separate in terms of life cycle and sales contribution, which leads to the different ways they engage with the brand. Here we'll begin to dig deeper into the guest distribution in terms of how they contribute to sales and traffic, and the top consideration drivers, which is going to be what makes them choose your brand. And then we also look at how they use your brand now. You can begin to see how positioning should vary across personas and how messaging should change as well. So for your primary and secondary, we don't see a whole lot of difference here, but we begin to see here that they use the brand differently and make important contributions in different days of the week. We can begin to think then about the days to shift so when we're doing digital and partner advertising, like on reservation sites. Your remaining groups look different. They visit for pretty different reasons, and again contribute to different days of week and areas of restaurant. So to the challenge, let's put some color around who they're calling the beachhead. This is, again, from all of the data sources that we were able to use. We learned that the guest is typically a he, and he's an older, successful professional who is making a substantial income. And while we know a fair amount about his personal life, he's likely married and there aren't any kids at the home. He spends his money on cars and homes, things like that. It's really the professional insight that drives the engagement with him, as he appears to be hosting business dinners often. And we found this through reservation data. Knowing his gravitation for high-end, high quality, and exclusiveness, we can position the brand better when we talk about his interests like wine and gourmet foods. So by taking what we know about the busy executive, we begin to think through how positioning and messaging should change to be more relevant to him. So here you'll see that the left 2 columns represent what we learned from the persona development work. We already saw that high-end, high-quality exclusiveness register as a driver for him. So for targeting, focusing on best-in-class and quality ingredients is kind of a no-brainer, but focusing on the local store being able to create an amazing experience for him is something that the brand hadn't really considered in terms of one of the key drivers. For the primary guest here, it will be important to de-emphasize the chain concept and create a one-to-one experience. And thinking about how he's using the brand, again, he's mostly entertaining when he's at the restaurant, so the one-to-one personal touch will play well with him. He's trying to exude quality and sophistication to his dinner guests, so that's what the brand will emulate to him. Now we shift into actual shopping and media habits. The shopping habits tell us that he tends to frequent high-end brands, and this gives us an idea into, the different characteristics that those brands have in common with the client. Here, the presence of high-end retail, I think, supports the theme of quality, not price. In terms of digital marketing and understanding not only how to reach him, but how to acquire more people like him, this brand will consider digital partners that effectively target him online through travel and financial sites, large national news sites, sites like the Wall Street Journal, and then when he's on social, he's likely to be found on LinkedIn and review sites like TripAdvisor, which again reflects his interest in travel. So for TV and radio, this presented a bit of a change for our client. They had been buying expensive network evening news, and we're seeing that due to his work and his media behavior, he's not watching the evening news, and he's certainly not watching it live. So given his propensity to watch on-demand television and his likelihood to have an Apple TV, they'll be testing network pre-roll, and they'll be testing other buys to focus more on sporting events at the local cable level, given the likelihood that he subscribes to sports networks and is likely watching it live and isn't fast forwarding through the commercials. So given his appreciation for fine wine and gourmet foods, it's really no surprise that the household is likely receiving what we call sophisticated monthly print. His household is receiving Wine Spectator, Cigar Aficionado, national newspapers, and then you begin to see the impact of his wife through the likelihood of the household receiving Veranda, and then also things like Real Simple. Also, while he's a digital consumer of news, he tends to over-index for receiving and responding to print mail. This is certainly something to keep in mind when we start to think about acquisition. Now we begin to look at persona targeting by channel and the insights we derive from the work. So we did a pretty full review of the busy executive, and now we'll look at how that might change based on the secondary and other personas. We know that email engagement, the busy executive is not likely to be part of the member base, but he is likely to open emails. Then, to the contrary, we would see that savvy singles are less likely to engage in email, and they're more likely to engage in things like app and pay at the table type mediums. For out of home, we know that busy executives would be well targeted through heavy commuter areas. In terms of website, we would begin to think about flanking reservation widgets on site with the value props that resonate back to the busy executive. For other website targeting, in contrast, for example, with savvy signals, we could use the site as a destination for local site calendars. So the savvy singles are more likely to be interested in events, happy hours, live music, those types of things. And in terms of digital behavior, we did walk through the busy executive. So, looking at the affluent households, we see that they tend to be early adopters. They're going to be online a lot. They're doing things on financial sites. They're doing travel. And you can see how that contrasts to the younger personas where they're more interested in looking at childcare and parenting sites. They're doing some online gaming and then also doing a lot of shopping. TV and radio behavior, again, just kind of interesting to see, compare and contrast the two older personas with busy executives and affluent households, more likely to be on news channels, NPR and classical, and then you see the shift again for PBS and children's programming, and then Hulu and pay-per-view for the younger. In terms of print behavior, probably not too surprising here. The order categories are going to over-index for mail, print, and DM, and then you begin to look at the younger groups, and they're going to be more likely to be reading information on their mobile platforms. So they're going to be accessing their favorite magazines on mobile. And then for social, you can begin to see the shift again. So the older groups are going to be more on review sites, LinkedIn, and then you start to see that shift to Instagram as they get a little bit younger. I see that we've had a couple of questions come through, so why don't we go ahead and take some questions?
Let me ask some questions here, Erin. So the first one is about where the internal data comes from, the sources like POS. What else could you summarize for us in terms of the sources of data?
So internal sources, there's really, it's all going to be client specific, client dependent. Anytime that somebody has signed up for an email or a communication, anytime you've done any type of loyalty program where you've asked and received information from your guests, internal data is going to be that you've sourced and that the client has, or the customer has given to you.
Great, thank you. Now the second question is also about data sources, and it's the number of them. And this question, the person says, I don't have that many data sources and our IT team is pretty small. So how do you get around that challenge?
Certainly, we actually see that quite a bit. A lot of our clients do have a bit of challenge in pulling together the various sources of the data. So it's something that we're used to working with. Our team here helps to source as much of the data as possible. Really what we're looking to do is just understand all of the different ways that customer data flows into the client, and then we can work with those vendors to secure that data on a regular, ongoing basis. And what that enables to do, it enables us to populate all of these different attributes on the guest to then go and work on the persona projects.
And then, Erin, here's another question. How do you know that the number of guests presented in a persona is representative of the full population?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So for the append process, we take a random sample and we check for even distribution across all stores, and we look at tenure on the member and non-member level. And really based on both the member and non-member population, we ensure that the sample size that is returned through the persona project passes statistical significance calculations.
Great, thank you very much. I don't think we have any more questions, so we're going to give you back the rest of your afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at a webinar again in our Fishbowl series, which will begin after the new year. So we wish you happy holidays in advance and look forward to next year. Thank you so much.